Welcome back to Tales Arcane. In this video I'm going to talk about just one thing, the Dungeon Master's Guide. And the reason I'm framing the video the way that I am, with the title that I've chosen, is because I know a lot of DMs out there have never read the Dungeon Master's Guide. You might even own a copy of the book, but a lot of DMs have never read beyond the first few chapters. I think the reason for this is that when you get into DMing for the first time, you're presented with two books that are important and one book that is supplementary. The important books are the Player's Handbook, where you learn about all the races, the rules, the classes, all the core player stuff, and all the core rules for combat and movement. And then the Monster Manual, which is of course a great resource for getting all the enemies that the players are going to be facing. And then the Dungeon Master's Guide is seen as supplementary material. Look, it's nice to have, it's got some useful tables in it, but you don't really need it. And if you've already gone in $80 or $100 on the first two books, save yourself some money and skip the DMG. Well, I'm here today to tell you, sure, you can skip it, but it's great. And if you do get a chance to pick it up or get a free copy, have a look at it, I cannot recommend it enough. I'm going to talk about 5 things that I love in the Dungeon Master's Guide, how they've helped me in my games. And these are just 5 of many great things in here, but I'm hoping that after this video, you'll go away and maybe find some value you didn't know was there in the DMG. By the way, if you want to support what I do here on the channel, I do have a Patreon where I post my original homebrew D&D content. When you sign up to the Tales Arcane Patreon, you get access to more than 1,000 pages of my original D&D homebrew, including encounters, adventures, campaign settings, battle maps, and a whole lot more. Any support is much appreciated. Now, let's talk about the DMG. I didn't buy a copy of the Dungeon Master's Guide for almost a year after I started running games, and that was because whenever I opened the Dungeon Master's Guide in a bookstore or looked at a PDF online, I saw a lot of content in the front portion of the book which seemed kind of pointless. There was a lot of stuff about different genres to run in D&D, and I don't really need an expensive book to tell me that I can run different kinds of fantasy in a D&D setting. What I didn't realize is that all the really good stuff is really in the second half of the book. And I'm just going to start with probably my favorite chapter in the DMG, chapter 9, the Dungeon Master's Workshop. This is where you get all the fun variant and optional rules. You've learned the basics, now you learn how to take all the basics apart and put them back together in a new way that works for you and your players. In this chapter we find some new character abilities, honor and sanity, which you can integrate into different kinds of games if you feel it's appropriate to the world that you're running. For example, sanity is going to be a great addition if you're running a horror-themed game. And it dovetails nicely with another part of the book where you can find tables on which you can roll for madness conditions. Again, you're not going to want these in every game, but it's just putting these options out there. And a lot of people don't necessarily know that these are systems that are designed to be integrated into D&D. I've talked about these things in videos and had people assume that I was talking about some kind of homebrew system. They don't realize that this is a suggested variant rule. There's alternative rules to make D&D feel grittier, like long rests that require 7 days of downtime in a safe location. There's rules for climbing up giant monsters if you want to scale the back of a giant and hit it in the back of the neck like Attack on Titan. There's a bunch of information on different kinds of weaponry and technology if you want to bring in guns, bombs, alien sci-fi technology. And there are delightfully wildcard elements like plot points, which again I've talked about in another video, where a player can spend a plot point, a kind of plot token, to reshape the flow of the adventure as the Dungeon Master is describing something. A player can spend their plot point and say, well, wait a minute, we're going to integrate a new element here. There's a trapdoor over in the corner that we didn't notice before. That's not going to work for everyone, but I just love that you have all these suggestions, and as you read through this chapter, and as you see all these different variant options, you're going to start thinking of things you might want to do a little bit differently in your own games. Even if you want to just take 1 or 2 small elements from one particular system in here, it is absolutely worth a look. I want to stay at the back of the book now and talk about the appendices. So Appendix A is a fantastic resource if you ever want to run a dungeon. It's a huge collection of tables to generate every randomized aspect of a dungeon and the different rooms in a dungeon as the players pass through it. And I mean every aspect. So you've got your general broad stroke stuff, the location of the dungeon, the kind of dungeon that it is, the purpose that it was built for and who built it. That can all be generated through the tables. But then you have the more niche and specific stuff. For example, what does a dungeon smell like? What do the individual rooms smell like? What is the temperature in each room? Again, you can roll for all of this on the tables. Is there broken pottery on the ground? Are there old arrows stuck into the wall? every random detail you can think of can be generated with dice rolls here, and you can do it on a room by room basis, so you don't know what the players are going to encounter until they open the next door and you roll the dice. Or if you're prepping it in advance, you can roll those dice, and as you're doing it, ideas are flowing together and you're able to start constructing a very well prepped dungeon built on top of all these random elements. You can get traps, different kinds of traps, different trap effects, and one of my favorite elements is the tricks tables. So first you have a table for the thing that is going to trick you, and it could be a book, a plant, a tree, an old statue, a big table here. And then there's the trick effects, and this is like how you're being tricked, and it can be something like produces false coins or gives you incorrect directions, and you end up, you roll and you get tree, and then you roll again and you get gives false directions, and now you just know there's going to be a talking tree in this dungeon that really wants the players to go down the wrong route because it's bored and it's just trying to direct adventurers to the wrong places, and you've just got a unique, interesting little funny encounter that you wouldn't have had you not been rolling these random tables. Appendix A is just fantastic, and I see people sometimes in my comments saying things like, okay, can you give us advice on different kinds of traps, or how to design a dungeon, how to do the dungeon layout, and I just think, just go to Appendix A. You don't need me, it's all there. I mean, it's good content for me to make, and I should make it at some point, but Appendix A covers you for everything. Now, a quick word on Appendix B, which is not as exciting or as extensive as Appendix A, but it's still really useful. This is where basically you have all the monsters, and what's cool about it is they're grouped in two ways. First, they're grouped by region, and then they're grouped by CR. So in the grouped by region section, if you're ever sitting down to plan an encounter, you don't know what to do, just think, well, where are the players? Are they in an urban environment, Arctic, swamp? And then just go to the appropriate regional section within Appendix B and see what monsters are there, and within that section they're listed by CR. So you can say, well, my players are around level 5, so I'm looking for maybe a CR6 monster that's going to be found in an urban environment. Boom, you've got a whole list there that's going to really help inspire those ideas. Underdark, Arctic, Jungle, it's all covered here. Then after that, you've got just listed by CR, which is very useful. And again, you can find this sort of stuff online, but it's nice having it all in a physical space. I use this section a lot when I'm maybe short on ideas and I just need to quickly generate something for an encounter. And let's just do it now. So let's say our players are in the Underdark. So we're going to page 305. And we've got a whole list here. Let's say there's CR2 monsters we're looking for. I mean, we've got masses here. Constrictor Snake, Gibbering Mouther, Minotaur Skeleton, Nothic, Orog. I mean, I don't even know what an Orog is. Polar Bear in the Underdark? That doesn't feel right. It does say Polar Bear, and then in brackets, Cave Bear, so I guess that's fine. But anyway, I really do think Appendix B is fantastic. Appendix A is better, but Appendix B is really good if you're just looking for that quick start inspiration for a monster for a particular kind of biome. Now let's jump over to Chapter 4, which is another fantastic resource for inspiring ideas and encounters and kind of just doing the work for you. Chapter 4 is all about generating NPCs, including the day-to-day civilians the players might meet in villages and towns, as well as nefarious characters and villains they might be going up against. Chapter 4 is again full of tables that you can roll on, which, as you can tell, I really like. And one of the great things is how all the tables start to play off against each other as you roll on each one to generate an NPC. You generate things like their appearance, unique flaws, bonds that they have with the world around them, and as you do that, stories just start to naturally emerge. For example, let's say we've got our NPC bonds here, and we roll on it and we get protective of a sentimental keepsake. But then let's roll again randomly, let's say on the NPC's flaws and secrets, and we get a shameful or scandalous history. Now immediately what comes to mind for me there is that this keepsake is perhaps from an important family ancestor, like a great-grandparent or even a parent, who actually was quite a shameful or dark character, maybe a villainous warlord who did something terrible. And the NPC has this conflicted relationship where they really value this little keepsake, something passed down from someone who was to them a dear family member, but who is to everyone else a horrifying tyrant or a murderer. And suddenly we have this interesting secret of the person not wanting to admit that they're descended from this terrible villain, but also not wanting to let go of that connection to an important element of their family. That stuff just generates itself because you're rolling on these different tables and the different elements in the tables are bouncing off each other. a lot of my encounters, especially when I was starting out on the Patreon, began with me just rolling a bunch of dice on these tables and then building something off what I got. Later on in chapter 4, we also have a whole section on villains. And in terms of tables and randomization, it's not as extensive as the NPCs, because usually a villain is going to be partly defined by its stat block, the kind of monster that you're using for the villain. But there is some really interesting things here about the villain's schemes and how they're going about their schemes. So for example, we have a large table for schemes, essentially what they're trying to do, and then an even larger table for their methods. And I just love these two elements. So for example, you could roll on the villain's scheme and find out that they want to conquer a region or incite a rebellion, gain favor with a ruler, avenge a past humiliation and insult, and so on. But then we go over to the villain's methods. How are they going to do this? We roll, and let's say we get a 4. A 4 is captivity or coercion, but within that we roll a d10 to find out the specifics of that captivity or coercion. We roll again and we get legal intimidation. So maybe this villain is actually trying to use a kind of like a powerful legal team to threaten a good-hearted tavern keeper to move off their land because that villain wants to get access to something buried on that land. And again, a story just starts to weave itself around these elements, and you don't have to do that much work. And what you'll find is you've got great ideas, you just need a spark to get them moving. And once again, this is what the DMG does best. It gives you sparks that you can fan into fires. Finally, there is chapter 7, a huge catalogue of magical items. Now that's useful in itself. If you're ever stuck on how to reward your players after a long quest, you can browse through chapter 7 and you'll see magical items that you've kind of forgotten about. Also, if you rely heavily on D&D Beyond, this section is a revelation, because it is absolutely full of magical items that are not available through D&D Beyond, or at least through the sort of base subscription to D&D Beyond. There's so many cool, weird, overpowered items here that, especially at a higher level, will be a lot of fun to give your players. But what I love is towards the latter portion of this chapter, once again, you guessed it, it's the tables that help you develop your own magical items. Say you are developing a magical item and you're worried that it's a little bit overpowered, you can just jump to the tables that give you minor and major detrimental effects, things that are going to make a bit of a trade-off with how powerful and useful an item is. You might find that yes, this is a great item, but also you roll 16 to 20 on your D100 and the artifact houses a bodiless force that is hostile towards you. Each time you use an action that involves the item, the sort of powerful negative force that is trapped within the item is trying to attack you and overpower you at the same time. There's a whole range of these different options that you can add in. There's also physical properties. So for example, you might roll for just a small, interesting physical feature on the magical item. It doesn't do anything, but it adds some flavor. For example, no matter how kind of dirty the item should be, no matter how poorly cared for it is, it always seems to be gleaming and new. Just small things that make them stand out in the player's mind. Again, it's kind of doing the work for you, and then your own ideas will run on top of that, but all the base stuff is covered by the tables. I also really like the section in here about creating sentient items. There's a lot of information about how to develop the goals and desires of a sentient item, including tables for what that sentient item feels its purpose is in the world, why it was brought into the world. And there's also information about how to run almost a conflict between the item and its owner. Yes, you're wielding the sword, but maybe the sword's alignment is different from yours, and you have different desires from the world around you. And that's just a really interesting idea for a character who finds a really powerful weapon, but realizes that they're almost in conflict with the sentient weapon they're holding, and they have to start bargaining with it to make sure it's doing the job it's meant to do. So many story possibilities, and I think that is the key theme of this whole video and this whole book, is just, as a dungeon master, we spin stories, and a lot of the time we have to spin those stories out of literally nothing, and that can take a lot of energy and effort. And this book says, well, no, you're still spinning the story, but here's a bunch of material to work with, a bunch of ideas to jump off from. And you'll find it's very hard to be out of ideas when you have the DMG within easy reach. That being said, I don't recommend that you spend loads of money that you don't have on books you don't need. This is a good book to have, but there are also other ways to get a hold of this book that don't involve you splashing out loads of cash for the physical copy. So just bear that in mind. I would definitely recommend looking this up, finding a copy for yourself and having a read, because it's been an invaluable resource for me, and I think a lot of DMs, especially newer DMs, are sleeping on this and not realizing just how much easier their lives could be with this book in their collection. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you don't mind that this was a bit of a different video. This was just me unscripted, ranting about things I like in the DMG, but it was a lot of fun to make, and it's been on my mind recently that this is a resource more people should be taking advantage of. Anyway, if you want to back me, head over to the Patreon. That's always much appreciated, and I will see you in the next video.